got New Zealand.
All
right. Without further ado, let's get started. We are here today in our continuing series of Creating Your Ideal Life by Distilling Wisdom from Books. And the book we're reviewing, continuing our review of, is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by R Covey. And we have covered quite a fair chunk of the book. We're on the home stretch now. We covered the part 1, paradigms and principles, starting with the explanation that when you change anything in life, you start from the inside out. To manifest effective change begins with yourself, with your own thinking, your own vision of what you want to achieve. And so he talks about using these paradigms and principles to achieve a steady transition from private victories to public victories. And what he meant by that was the private victory is in having a vision for yourself and a personal mission and figuring out what you want out of life and the way that you want your life to operate and the principles that you're going to stand by, beginning with that end in mind. So doing what you're doing to work towards that vision that you have for your life or that mission that you've set for yourself, and being proactive in the sense of taking steps towards making your daily routines and your daily habits steps in the right direction towards what you want to achieve. And if you can get yourself under control in terms of your own self-talk and your own self-analysis and your own habits, your own behaviors, then you can move to public victory, which is not victory over the public, it is victory with the public. It is helping other people. So moving from being dependent to being independent to then being interdependent. So starting out as a child, being dependent on your parents, moving to independence as you grow and become a teenager and then an adult, and then interdependence is when you realize that you need other people to achieve things. You need to work with people to collaborate. That separately, then we're coming to this concept today, is the synergy concept, that separately we can achieve more than, that together we can achieve more than we can separately. And so with public victory, concepts like thinking win-win, looking for how we can, whatever we're trying to achieve, how we can win at it, but at the same time, the other participants in whatever we're doing also get a win out of it. So far more effective than the situation where we win and they lose, or they win and we lose, or we both lose. None of those outcomes are usually very good unless it's a conscious decision, say perhaps to make a family member feel better or something. You might let them have a win at your expense. But ideally, in most scenarios, you're looking for where you can get a win-win out of the situation, or a no deal. If you can't agree a situation in business, perhaps where you're trying to work out a contract or something, if you can't make it a win for both of you, then sometimes you're better off to walk away from that deal. So no deal is another possibility. The key thing in all of that, in negotiating anything, is the habit 5 was to seek first to understand and then to be understood. So rather than trying to assert our viewpoint and our thinking onto other people, first understand why they think what they think, where are they coming from, what has led to their conclusions. And by asking more questions, maybe we come to the realization that there may be something that they know that we don't. There may be some new information that comes to light, or they have a different way of looking at it because they're aware of different circumstances, different backgrounds, a different perspective. So firstly, understanding other people, but also looking for how we can work out a result that's going to be a win for both of us. So that's pretty much where we're up to in covering, as we have, up to habit 5, and developing that principle of empathic communication, developing the ability to look at things from other people's perspective, but in doing so, not to diminish our own sense of self-worth or our own anchor, if you like, to our own internal security system, that knowing that we have principles, that we have a firm foundation that we can operate from, that we have a sort of a code, a moral code, a standard that we live by. And if we have that foundation in place, that enables us far more effectively to seek to understand other people without fearing that, you know, they may know stuff we don't, and it could negatively impact on us, without fearing that in any way anybody else can diminish our stature, that other people can only really enhance us, and maybe they provide something new that we didn't know about. So that's kind of where we're up to. Has anyone got anything they'd like to add to my very quick summary of several weeks worth of conversation and analysis? V, you've been with us most of the way. Coralie, I think that's what Stan's been most of the meetings as well. Any of you want to add anything to that, or think I've missed anything that you think is important to be added in? And V, you're muted by the sound of it. We've had no sound from V. Do we have, you can use the chat box if that's still not working. Depending
yeah,
on,
I was just wondering with the lose-win,
yeah,
if there really is such a thing, or if it just turns into lose-lose. Because like your example of, you might let a family member have a win at your expense. If they know that you've done that, then they feel bad. So it's not even a lose-win.
Oh, okay, that's a good question, Coralie. For that one, I'll just go back to the chapter on Think Win-Win. So there was this section that said which option is best. So of these 5 philosophies discussed so far, win-win, win-lose, lose-win, lose-lose, and win, which is the most effective? The answer is it depends. If you win a football game, that means the other team loses. Blah, 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 blah. I'll just try and look for that specific answer for your question. If you value a relationship and the issue isn't really that important, you may want to go for lose-win in some circumstances to genuinely affirm the other person. What I want isn't as important to me as my relationship with you. Let's do it your way this time. So it's a kind of a concession. You might also go for lose-win if you feel the expense of time and effort to achieve a win of any kind would violate other higher values. Maybe it just isn't worth it. So I think you've raised a good point, because he does say somewhere else, actually in this chapter I think we're about to go into, that concession is not necessarily good in the long term. So you're right there.
I'm more sort of challenging myself with that, because that has been my sort of default position. And so, yeah. Stop.
And so that's very interesting. When you realized that, how did you feel about it?
Very justified at first. And then, you know, of course, that's what I would do, because, you know, caring about other people, blah, blah. Yeah. But win-win is so infinitely better, because it's more than just win-win, that it's worth learning more and about how to do it.
I suppose, yeah, that's a really good insight. I suppose my thought on it, my answer to it would be that it's a bit like you might agree to lose a battle in order to win the war, if it, like, the end justifies the means. If it's a case of, like you said, it's not really that important, then maybe you compromise in the interests of a long-term win. But I think if you're keeping the long-term vision in mind of what you both want to achieve, then you may not win on every detail of the progressive evolution of what it is you're trying to achieve. So I think it comes back to this. His first answer is it depends. It really depends on the situation. the level of complexity of the issue that we're talking about. And so it's kind of a hard one to generalize about, because every situation will be different. But I get where you're coming from. I do, because I think, I mean, he does say it in this later chapter that if you make that a habit, I think this is the key point. If you make it a habit of lose-win, you're putting yourself down, letting everyone walk all over you. You're being a doormat. If that's your default position. But if in this case this is a minor matter, to let you have your way on this. And look, we do that all the time in marriages and so on, don't we? We want our partner to be happy, so we might go, okay, we'll do it your way this time, but you've got an overall objective of what you're trying to achieve. There has to be a certain amount of give and take. So I don't think we should dwell or get too hung up on that, because I think it's more, he's talking about your default positions, and some people do have that default of lose-win, and they may not even realize they're doing it. And that's what he's really trying to stir up in us, is that self-awakening and realizing, hang on, am I actually, do I make a habit of that? Anyone got any other thoughts on that? Not just my answer on it. I mean, what do you guys think?
Yeah, just on that, on making a habit of it. I think in a previous situation I was in, one of my MDs summoned me to his office, and there was someone else in the office when I got in there, and he turned to the other guy as I walked in the door. He said, I told you you'd be here within a couple of minutes, because Glenn's a yes man. Ooh. And from that day onwards, I sort of looked at him and went, nah, that's not the way it's going to be now. And it was always, yeah, no. That shall not happen.
Well done.
Yeah. And I went, yeah, that's interesting. I got on really, really well with him, and he was just having a bit of a laugh. But I thought, no, he said that for a reason, because that's the way he sort of thinks about me.
But it had an impact on you.
Yeah, definitely. And now, as you say, married life, it's not always yes. It's sometimes got to be a no. But there's that give and take. Yeah, but you don't want to get walked all over, that's for sure.
Sometimes you have to put your foot down with a firm hand.
And then leave the room quickly.
Well, there is that sort of old saying that you give way on the little things and you stand your ground on the important things. So V, you've put in the chat box, since you are muted temporarily, also really got a lot of value out of the emotional bank account. So the emotional bank account is where you are putting, where you're making, like you're making deposits into a bank account, but you're doing it in terms of relationships. So every time you give someone a compliment or you do something nice for somebody, you are adding value to someone's life in some way. You are technically sort of putting the equivalent of money into a bank account, but it's, in this case, it's emotional bank account. It's making them feel better, making other people feel better. Even things like, you might tell the checkout girl that you like her jewelry or something, or her hair looks nice today, or something like that. I don't mean to sound genderist when I say that. You might say that to a guy, but he might get the wrong impression. I don't know. So it's just little things that we can say, we can observe to people, and it's amazing what a difference if you say to someone, oh, that dress you're wearing looks really colourful, looks great on you, you look really nice, or something like that, without being corny or cheesy, or but just a genuine, sincere compliment, or noticing something about someone where they've made a bit of an effort, or they're trying to they've obviously gone to some trouble, like painted their nails or something like that, and you comment on it, just might make their day. So it could be a random stranger, but when you do it regularly with people that and you're developing that relationship, you're and also adding, when you are consistent, when you are maintaining your integrity by being consistent, by being genuinely a nice person all the time, rather than doing it for manipulative reasons. Is that a fair summary, V? Did I cover that? Okay, good. Anything else that came out of those first 5 habits? If you think of anything, just add it in the chat box if you can't speak, or stick your hand up if you want to say something. All right, so we're going on to today to chapter 6, habit 6. Synergise. This is a great comment right at the beginning of this chapter. When Sir Winston Churchill was called to head up the war effort for Great Britain, he remarked that all his life had prepared him for this hour. Who else has had that feeling? I know I have, when you go, what I'm doing right now, I feel like everything I've learned in my life up to this point has got me prepared for this moment, for this thing that I'm about to do. It's quite a powerful kind of impactful realization, isn't it? When you go, wow. Yeah, and you think back to some of the things that have happened that you might have thought were negative at the time, or a setback, or didn't go your way, and they go, oh, well, maybe that's why that was meant to happen, so that now I've learned from that, or I've grown because of it, and now here I am ready to help these people do this or whatever, because I had that setback, or I had that same problem, or suffered that same catastrophe, whatever it might have been. Not always necessarily negative things, could be positive things too that you've done in your past that have prepared you for this moment. And sometimes you think, that was really obscure, that thing that I did. You might have gone and done a course in something really out there, I don't know, flower arranging or something, that suddenly you go, now I can make these creative things for people. If I hadn't done that course, I wouldn't know this stuff. Just one that popped into my head. I don't know why, but anyway. So synergy is the essence of principle-centered leadership. Yes, strange things do pop into my head. It's true. Simply defined, it means that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So together we can achieve a lot more than we can separately. If you looked at it mathematically, you would say 1 + 1 = 3, or even many more. But 1 + 1 does not just equal 2, it equals more than 2. So the fact that we can brainstorm ideas, the fact that we can inspire each other to think of new things, or provide resources that the other person didn't have, that you knew about or you had access to. So there's all sorts of things that we can help each other to be better. So this is interesting. It says the creative process is also the most terrifying part, because you don't know exactly what's going to happen or where it's going to lead. You don't know what dangers and challenges you'll find. It takes an enormous amount of internal security to begin with this spirit of adventure, the spirit of discovery, the spirit of creativity. Without doubt, you have to leave the comfort zone of base camp and confront an entirely new and unknown wilderness. Wow. The challenge is to apply the principles of creative cooperation, which we learn from nature, in our social interactions. So we can change by being creative, by encouraging synergy, by looking for ways where we can collaborate and cooperate with people. We can change people's scripting or their pattern behavior. We can influence them in positive ways. And perhaps it says perhaps we can change the whole next generation, and make them one that is more loving, more caring, less possessive and judgmental. Well, now this is an interesting conflicting possibility here. Maybe he says that what if it might seem that by doing that, by communicating synergistically, that you're casting aside habit 2, which is to begin with the end in mind. Because if you're being creative and synergetic, you might come up with new ideas that weren't part of that original end in mind. So he covers that potential contradiction there by saying that you do have an inward sense of excitement and security and adventure, believing that it will be significantly better than it was before. And that is the end that you have in mind. So you begin with the belief that parties involved will gain more insight and that the excitement of that mutual learning and insight will create a momentum towards more and more insights, learnings, and growth. So it doesn't mean you've abandoned the end that you had in mind. It means you're probably going to improve on that end even more than you thought you could, because you're enhancing your capabilities by adding the capabilities of other people from the team. Have I lost anyone there, or does that make sense? That's my sort of attempt to explain that, what I got from what he was saying there. Ineffective people live day after day with unused potential. They experience synergy only in small peripheral ways in their lives. So, so unless people have a high tolerance for ambiguity and get their security from integrity to principles and inner values, they find it unnerving and unpleasant to be involved in highly creative enterprises. Their need for structure, certainty, and predictability is too high. One of the scariest words in the human language is the word change, because most people fear change. But if you can embrace change, which we're all doing because we're on this course and on this call, the fact that you're embracing change means you're welcoming new ideas, new inspiration, new input into your life. But most people are actually afraid of change, and they'd rather have the status quo than the unknown. You know, it's safer to sit in the cave around the campfire because there might be dinosaurs outside the cave, you know, that are willing to eat you, chomp you. Interesting, hey? So it talks about synergy in the classroom. There are times when neither the teacher nor the student knows for sure what's going to happen if we're encouraging synergy. In the beginning, there's a safe environment that enables people to be really open and to learn and to listen to each other's ideas. Then comes brainstorming, where the spirit of evaluation is subordinated to the spirit of creativity, imagining, and intellectual networking. Well, classrooms, networking meetings, you know, business meetings online like this, there's always somebody comes in with some new piece of information or some insight, and you go, aha, I didn't know about that, or I hadn't thought about it that way. So that's the principle of synergy. We all grow because of it. The more authentic you become, the more genuine in your expression, particularly regarding personal experiences and even self-doubts, the more people can relate to your expression, and the safer it makes them feel to express themselves. So I suppose that element of vulnerability, if we're willing to risk being judged or being thought of to be a fool or a half-wit or something, we put our thoughts, our 2 bobs worth into the mix. Maybe we enhance the conversation. Maybe we help move things forward. So there's a certain degree of courage required to put yourself out there. So raise your hand and go, yes, I've got something to add. I want to say something. So feel free to do that. And he goes on to say, once people have experienced real synergy, they're never quite the same again. They know the possibility of having other such mind-expanding adventures in the future. Hey, we're all on a mind expansion program here. Synergy is exciting. Creativity is exciting. It's phenomenal what openness and communication can produce. I love this point, and I even put an orange star next to it. That's how big a point I thought this was. So he was talking about this group where they kind of disagreed with each other on things, and but then there was a genuine effort to understand. And so he said the attitude was, so somebody's got a different viewpoint to you or a different way of looking at something to you. The attitude was, if a person of your intelligence and competence and commitment disagrees with me, doesn't mean you're an idiot. It means then there must be something to your disagreement that I don't understand, and I need to understand it. You have a perspective, a frame of reference I need to look at. So that goes back to that habit that we discussed last time, seek first to understand and then be understood. If I don't get what you're on about, I know you're not a stupid person. I know you usually have good ideas and you're trying to be helpful here. You're trying to improve things, move things forward. So what is it, where are you coming from that I don't understand? There's something I'm missing here. So it's a key thing, I think, that to develop that trait of wanting to understand why somebody sees it differently to you, rather than just dismissing them as I'm right and you're wrong. I win, you lose. Yep. Okay. So the combination of the emotional bank account and thinking win-win and seeking first to understand creates the ideal environment for synergy. So all those previous habits that we've talked about, the public victory habits, will create this environment for synergy. Of course, we've got to go back to, we've got to have set the firm foundation in place, which is the first few habits that he talked about, you know, the thinking from the inside out and developing your own foundation, if you like, of character and integrity and so forth. And then you're quite open to exploring new ideas, new concepts, because it doesn't threaten who you are, because you've got a firm foundation. And if you can achieve a synergistic solution, instead of a transactional relationship or a transactional interchange or exchange of ideas, it's a transformation. By using synergy, by getting a better result than you each could separately, you both get what you really want and you build your relationship in the process. So he calls this the third alternative. It's a major paradigm shift from the dichotomous either or mentality. Like either you see it my way or we see it your way. Now, what if we could both see it a better way? So that is the shift that makes it transformative. And we have that conflict going on inside our own heads, of course. Before we even start with the other person, we've got our own, the right brain and the left brain going on, the analytical and the intuitive. And, you know, we might think one thing logically, but then we feel different. And so we've got to resolve that. That's why it says start from the inside out. And learn to value the differences. Value the differences that all people, I love this too, this was in the Orange people. Or the key to valuing those differences is to realize that all people see the world not as it is, but as they are. So back to that concept of, you know, what you do speaks so loudly, I cannot hear what you say. That, you know, if people behave or are consistently acting in a certain way, they might say something different, but your observation is, well, that's how they're acting, you know, and that's who they are. And that's because that's the way they see the world. And he sums all that up by saying that there's no real rights or wrongs, there's just perspectives. And this is, you go right back to that original concept of the picture where you can see the young lady and the old lady. A lot of people see one and not the other. But once somebody explains it to you, you can see both. And then you kind of, once you've seen them, you kind of can't not see them. I told you that Wayne Dyer analogy, didn't I, with the mind. The human mind is like a pair of elasticated boxer shorts. You can stretch them and they keep going back into shape. One day you stretch them that little bit further and they never go back into the same shape again. I love that one. It's a little bit bizarre, so it just appealed to my sense of humor and so on. But that's the human mind. So he talked about forces, restraining forces and driving forces being juxtaposed. So driving forces generally are positive, reasonable, logical, conscious and economic. In juxtaposition, restraining forces are often negative, emotional, illogical, unconscious and social or psychological. They're both real and both need to be taken into account when you're dealing with change. Ecology. It's a great buzzword when you're talking about NLP. And I love this simple explanation. Ecology is a word which basically describes the synergism in nature. Everything is related to everything else. So how there's a concept there that, you know, how you are in one area of your life tends to be how you are overall. You know, if you're naturally cautious, you're probably generally cautious. Although, as Stan and I were discussing yesterday, there might be different situations, and this is where the personalities can come into. You might have you might be easygoing in a social environment, but if your work depends on you getting it right, like you're a brain surgeon or an airline pilot or something, then you have a different, you use different aspects of your personality there to deal with that situation, because you need to. If you need to be directive, or you need to be really accurate, consistent, reliable, you might not be like that in your social life, because you can relax then. You don't have, because there's different demands on you from work and so on. But that said, ecology is where does something fit into the way you look at the world. So if you've changed a perspective on something, is that now going to sit well with the rest of your attitude to life? Think of an example of that. Maybe you go into, let's say you go into the keto food program, but at the same time you really love eating pie and chips. You know? Is that going to work, or are you going to have this overwhelming, no, you know, I can't, life is no good without pie and chips or red wine or whatever it is. Red wine, that usually gets the ladies, doesn't it? Yeah, so which will it overall, you know, can you incorporate that into your overall life, or is it going to mess everything up? So when we look at change, we can have these, you know, we fix one problem, but we create another problem. We like, you have a conflict going on somewhere else. And that's why a lot of the times when people try and make changes, they struggle with it. Like, for instance, you might have you know, a New Year's resolution to get super fit, and you're going to go to the gym every day to do it. But at the same time, you hate going to the gym. Is it going to work? If you find going to the gym boring, or can you find a way of making going to the gym interesting? So is it going to fit with your overall, you know, attitudes and beliefs and behaviors? And so that's the ecology. One thing is related to something else. And you think about nature, it's completely ecological in the sense that everything is dependent on everything else. Have I lost people there, gone too deep, or no? You don't want to add anything to that? There is not judgment in nature, V says. I know, that's it, completely agree. So nature is just what it is, and that's the way it is. And you know, the lion hunts the gazelle, and that's just what they do. And it's, you know, survival of the fittest out there. But the synergy concept is kind of going, well, you know, let's say if we work together, see how the lions attack the gazelle. They kind of work together to isolate the one gazelle that they want to go after and separate it from the herd. I watched a documentary just recently about whale sharks doing that. Not whale sharks, sorry, killer whales, orcas, were going to separate a baby whale from its mother so they could eat it. So they had this whole thing where they worked together to get the two whales separated so that they could attack the one without the mum being able to defend it. So nature just, it doesn't have any judgment on that. That's just nature. That's just the way it is, you know, and it can seem harsh sometimes. So again, a key point about this, although you cannot control the paradigms of others in an interdependent interaction of the synergistic process itself, let's put that into layman's terms. You can't control what other people are thinking and what they're going to do. But if you're trying to work together, what you can control is what's within your circle of influence, which is starting from the inside out. So if I'm willing to say to Coralie, I don't agree with what you're saying there, Coralie, but you're an intelligent person. There's obviously something that you want to that you know that I don't, or you have a different way of looking at it to me. I really want to understand where you're coming from. Could you explain it to me, please? So see if I can understand it better. And if I'm doing that genuinely, I'm not trying to sound demeaning or putting you down or being sarcastic or something. But if I'm genuinely trying to understand your position, your point of view, because I'm accepting that we see this differently, and I want to know why, then we're taking responsibility ourselves to seek first and then be understood. And that's something we can control. I can control how I'm going to behave towards you. I have no real control over how you're going to behave towards me. I can try and influence it, but I can't control it. And that's a big thing, isn't it? Relationships, particularly. You know, you can't control your partner. They're with you because they want to be with you. But if they decide suddenly they don't want to be with you anymore, you can't control that. There's a lot of conflicts starting with that kind of thing, isn't there? What do you mean you want to leave me? You don't love me anymore. What do you mean I don't understand you? All those kinds of things that go on. Oh, like, here's a good one. You don't have to take insults personally. You can sidestep negative energy. You can look for the good in others and utilize that good, as different as it may be, to improve your point of view and to enlarge your perspective. When you can only see two alternatives, yours and the wrong one, you can look for a synergistic third alternative. You don't have to, of course, but that would be encouraging synergy if you can find a win-win, if you can find a way of incorporating their ideas, or you might instead perhaps, by understanding their position, then be able to explain your position in a different way, in a way that will make sense to them. If indeed you are right and they are wrong, because you know something that they don't know. And by making them aware of it, you can change that whole situation. Okay, but the overall objective is synergy, which is improving by working together, collaborating. Well, there you go. That's that chapter. Any other thoughts on synergy? Anything I missed or anything anyone wants to add? You know, because I don't necessarily have all the answers, or my insights are not the only ones.
I think it's hardest to do with the people you're closest to.
That's interesting, Carly.
But you're not think.
Tell me more about that.
Oh. Well, just because, you know, if you've been with someone for a long time, then you think that you know what they think.
Yeah.
And preempt that, and yeah. And also you sort of, if you feel very comfortable with your relationship with them, then it can, you think it can take the knocks, and you sort of, you know, I actually speak for myself, I might fight more with my husband than anyone else, because other people I just wouldn't.
I'm not crying, Carly, at what you're saying. I've just got hay fever tears there. My eyes are watering. Just to be clear. It's very true what you're saying. We do think that we know people, and we do tend to go, and I remember watching a TV show about that years ago, where they used to take a husband and a wife into, you know, a separate room where they couldn't hear each other's answers, and they'd ask them the questions, and what's your husband's favorite color, or what's how many sugars does your husband take in his tea, or all these sorts of questions. And it was to see how well do you actually know the person, or what would your husband say about this, what would he think about that. And you might be surprised sometimes that they might come out with a completely different answer to what you expect. I mean, if you're the one making the tea and you put the right number of sugars in, you know that every day. But, you know, something that's a little bit more conceptual, you might be shocked. They might look at something differently to how you would assume that they would, based on what you know of them. You're quite right there. Perhaps you're more likely to do that with someone close to you because you have more interaction with them, whereas a stranger that you don't see very often, you're less likely to make those assumptions because you haven't had that close dialogue with them, perhaps. But then how often do we not see somebody for a few years and we instinctively kind of treat them as the same person they were when we last saw them, until we then realize that they've changed and grown and had other experiences in between. But your initial thing is you go back to where you left off. So we do kind of compartmentalize people, or we do sum up what we think we know about them. And so this is, again, something within your circle of influence that you can open your mind to the possibilities of them changing and them having become aware of new things as well. Although, in contradiction to that, there's that old saying that a leopard doesn't change its spots. So is that true? Is it that people have that underlying character and integrity trait, whether it's good or bad, and we might, you know, is a criminal capable of rehabilitation and becoming a good person? That's an age-old debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's that story of the scorpion and the frog. You guys know that one? Yeah. Where the frog asks for the scorpion goes up to the frog and says, they're both looking at this river, they're about to cross the river. And the scorpion says to the frog, can I hitch a ride on your back across the river to get to the other side? And the frog says, absolutely not. You're a scorpion. You'd kill me. You'd sting me. And he says, no, that would be stupid. Like if I stung you and you're in the middle of the river and you're taking me across, we'd both drown. So that would be pointless, wouldn't it? No, you can trust me. I'll put me on your back and take me across, and, you know, I'll buy you some frog's beer or something at the other side, whatever the incentive was. And the frog goes, oh, okay, then, all right, I'll take the chance. I'll take you across on my back. And they get halfway across the river and the scorpion stings the frog. And the frog's like, what the? You said you weren't going to do that. Now we're both going to drown. What made you do that? He goes, can't help it. I'm a scorpion. It's just what scorpions do, you know. I know I said this, but that's what I do. So there is that sort of theory that people don't really change, but we've all seen it, haven't we? That some people have changed. Some people have been going down the wrong path. Maybe they've got into drugs or mixing with the wrong crowd, is one of the old adages, isn't it? Hanging out with the wrong people, and you break away from those relationships and you start hanging out with better people, people who are going somewhere, people who've got positive to input to you, and maybe you change and you start learning and growing and studying. Do we write people off in society? Well, sometimes we do, or should we give people the chance to change? That's one for everyone to ponder, isn't it?
There's a few things in there, because like one is, you know, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So depending on how you look at someone, how they are to you. And there's so many things that can sort of have to do with how people are. It reminded me of this woman that I worked with just lately, who I worked with years and years ago, and she was very difficult to get on with. And then a few years after that job, she was diagnosed as diabetic. And once she got that sorted, she became a nice person.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that may be going through, so, you know, there's another saying about not judging people, I can't remember the exact words, but not judging people because you don't know what battle they're fighting. You don't know, somebody might have a really uncomfortable condition or an illness, or they've got a particularly traumatic situation that they're dealing with, or someone's relationship is going off the rails at home, and then they come to work and then they're a pain in the ass at work because things are not going well at home. And that's that concept that we were just talking about, where one part affects the whole. If you're, and this is when I first struggled with whether they're going to be a life coach or a business coach, and then I realized they're all interconnected anyway, because if your business is struggling, a good chance that you're not going to be very happy at home either. And vice versa, if you're not happy at home, your business is going to struggle. If your health isn't right, you know, probably that's going to affect everything. So you look at everything affects, like in nature, ecology, everything affects something else. There's a knock-on effect. And yes, some people could be really grumpy at work, and you think, why is that? What's going on? And then you find out that they're really unhappy in some other area, or there's something that's really bothering them that they're not dealing with. They don't have the tools to deal with it. So that's where sometimes maybe, do we just assume that person's grumpy and treat them as a grumpy person? Or do we try to get to the bottom of it and see if there's anything that we might be able to help them with, or give them direct them to somewhere where they can get the resources that they need to fix whatever the problem is. Very often we just write people off, don't we? But we could, because it's within our circle of influence, we could ask ourselves, well, why is that person behaving like that? Is there anything I could do? Would even just asking the person, are you okay? Would that make a difference? Or even talking about the elephant in the room. It depends on the relationship, obviously, and every situation is different. But let's say you were a manager. I've had this as a manager where you've got a staff member who's not performing, and you could ask them that question. You go, normally you've been really good, but now your performance has gone downhill. You know, is there anything that's bothering you that I can help you with? And sometimes people open up to you, and depending on how, again, like Veronica said about the emotional bank account, if you've built the relationship to where people can feel that they can talk to you, then there's a good chance that they will open up and tell you whatever it is that's going on, and then maybe you get a different perspective. I had one instance with that, with a girl who was working as a manager back in the days when I had the backpackers hostel, and we put this girl in as a manager, and she started off really, really well. And then suddenly her performance just went downhill. And my wife and I, at the time, my second wife, we were about to go away on holiday to the UK for probably 7 weeks or something. And we needed to have a manager in place that we were confident with, that could look after things. And my wife, being a little bit more, how can I put it, a bit less warm towards people and their issues, decided that we would just replace her with a different manager. And then we found out afterwards that what had been troubling her was that she'd got pregnant. It wasn't a planned pregnancy, and it was really, and she was like, what do I do? Do I get rid of it? Do I keep it? And she had all this internal battle going on. And I felt really bad when I found that out, but she didn't volunteer that information to us. We found out about it third party, and then went, oh, I wish I'd not, if she'd have told me that, we could have maybe dealt with it differently, you know. And that's, you know, that was a sad thing to uncover. But so you don't know, you never really know what's going on with somebody else's world, do you? You don't know what they're dealing with. You don't know what issues they're facing. And sometimes just asking more questions and being genuinely interested in people. And if you're not interested in them, don't ask the question. You know, you don't care. That's fine, I guess. But if you do care, or you're trying to help them in some way, then ask more questions. You might be surprised at what comes out.
Yeah, one of the first leadership trainings that I went on to when I moved back from England. So I walked into an area where there was probably 50 people that I was responsible for, and 45 of those were female, whereas I previously managed a team of 13, of only which one was a female. So, you know, carrying that shift. And then the first training we went on to was about the emotional bank account, emotional intelligence, emotional quotient. Yep. And it was just like, you've got 50 people out there, they've all got stuff going on in the background. So just don't judge them on how their performance is or whatever else. You know, they've all got stuff going on in the background. Some will let you know what it is, some won't. Some will tell you too much, some won't. Some are just a completely closed door. But it's managing those people and understanding that there is something going on in the background. Sorry, there is something going on in the background. It's a tricky thing to juggle.
Well, and that's the art of leadership and management, isn't it? Really, you develop. So, and it depends on your style and your personality. And some people are very, I don't care about people's emotions. I just want the results. You know, they're very what would you call it, choleric, or what would that be in disc? That would be directive. I can't remember what color that was. B, what color is that one? I can't remember. But then, you know, for me, I was more empathic, I suppose, and more the yellow personality. So I found it very easy when I had, and I worked in supermarkets in the early days, so it was mostly women in the workforce there. Apart from, you know, usually the guys had the roles in the storeman or the butcher's department. It was usually more guys, and then all the shop assistants and checkout operators were mainly females, not exclusively, but mainly. And I found that it was very easy for most of the women to actually open up and tell me, probably sometimes too much, that they would say, oh, you know, I've got this thing going on, my husband's had heart problems or whatever, and I'm worried about it, and, you know, and so they tell you these things, but immediately it meant you weren't as harsh in your expectations of their performance, or you'd make concessions, or you'd try to even just let them get it off their chest, so to speak, so they felt better about it, that, you know, you were aware of that they were dealing with something as well. And even just the fact that you asked people, you know, how are you, and how's your husband's day, how's it going, or it just made, like V said before, it was deposits in the emotional bank account where the trust was built, and then you could have that open and honest communication, and you could cut people some slack if you knew they were going through a hard time.
Yeah,
you're balancing that, you still had to get the job done, and still had responsibilities and everything. And for me, one of those was, you know, the great Australian sickie. I would always say to my staff, don't take sickies. If you want to take a day off for something, come and tell me in advance. You know, I've got a family gathering or something, and we try and rearrange things so you can have that day off. And then it doesn't just drop everybody else in the poo because you're not there, and suddenly everyone's got to do your job as well. But if we can plan for it, it's much better. So don't take sickies, come and talk to me and let's figure something out. And it worked. My staff hardly ever took sickies, because I created that environment where, you know, if somebody wanted to go home early for an appointment or a doctor's thing or whatever, you know, okay, we'll work around it. Let's figure, what can we do? How can we figure this out? Win-win.
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 I have to jump soon because I've got an appointment up the road at 9 o'clock, and I've got to get things sorted out. So
we are at time. So anyone got any last thoughts they want to add before we close off the meeting? And we'll come to number 7, sharpen the saw, next week, as I thought might happen anyway. Any other input? Any aha moments during today?
Just quickly, yeah, on those synergies, I was talking to someone the other day professionally about it, and, you know, the balance there has been between me and Denise, the way that we work. And he just said to me, he said, you're a partnership. You know, the balance years ago was I was the high earner and Denise was looking after the kids, and now it's Denise and more than me, and I look after the house and look after other stuff. So it's just balancing those things, but the realization of that and having that synergy that works together, but in a partnership, pretty much. Yeah, and you guys are a great example of that working too, I must say, from knowing you both. So. You see the outside. Yes. Like the duck underwater. See the parts that are all working smoothly on the surface. So I have to go. So nice to see you guys. Thank you guys. Thank every one of you for your input. And even if you weren't able to speak, we knew you were there in presence and spirit. And we'll see you next week. And we'll go on to sharpening the saw, the next habit, the 7th habit of the 7 highly effective habits. All right. Thank you guys. Bye. Thanks,